Welcome to the walkthrough of frequently made mistakes for assignment 3 in my CS 8395 course in summer 2022. First, please make sure to document your code thoroughly. Also, please make sure you run all the unit tests to make sure your code is passing them. If you're not passing unit tests, please make sure you post questions and I'll try to give you a hand. So let's take a look at some of the problems I saw with the perform crawl method, which is really the entry point into this assignment. First, make sure that you put your checks in the right place. This check doesn't belong here in this method. It belongs in the crawl page async method. Likewise, this check doesn't belong in this method. It belongs in the crawl page async method that comes later. Also, make sure to chain all these calls together using the Fluent interface pattern, just like all the examples we've covered in the class where I talk about Project Reactor, Flux, and monotypes. And then finally, you don't need to use this exception handler if you chain the operators together properly using the exception handling methods like onErrorReturn. Let's take a look at another problem I saw with perform crawl. This is not really a problem, it's just a stylistic issue. Please get in the habit of saying return and then chaining all the various calls together rather than using local variables. There's no need to do that, and it just makes the code a little harder to read. Let's take a look at another problem here. This is a similar issue. Please make sure you try to include these calls in the chain of Fluent calls above. Just makes it a little cleaner and easier to understand, especially if you document your code. So when I talk about documenting your code, you should be providing documents for all the methods you call here. Let's take a look now, turning our attention to some problems I saw with crawl page async. This method is very confused. Why is it filtering using this particular class stuff? I don't understand what that's there for. Make sure that you make the call to images on page and page links async here rather than doing it way up above. You don't want to be calling this at all under these circumstances. You also please use a method reference here. It's not really a bug, but it's just something to get in the habit of doing properly. And also, more importantly, this code here, these filter calls, these calls that are checking for various conditions, that belongs in the filter operator above rather than whatever is going on here. I don't understand what's going on here with using filter with get class. That makes no sense. These things have to go above because you don't want to do any of this code if it turns out that those conditions are not properly satisfied. Turning our attention again to some more problems with crawl page async, please take a look and make sure that you make your filter call check the appropriate conditions. You should be 2 checks to see whether or not the max depth has been exceeded and whether you've already seen the page. So make sure you do that. Please use the method reference again. And once you get rid of this call here, you can go ahead and hoist up the code so it is a little cleaner. You can get rid of having to use a statement here, but instead you can just have an expression. Let's take a look at some other issues with crawl page async. Once again, this call to put if absent doesn't belong here by itself. It should be merged into a filter expression called in the chain below. And then this code down here doesn't belong here at all. This is kind of hoisting up some code in a somewhat odd way from what should be parts of the implementation of images on page and page links async. So you should just be calling that method here, passing in the right parameters, rather than duplicating the code. Plus, I think this code is just incorrect. Let's take yet another look at some problems with crawl page async. Please write this as a condition expression, in other words, without the statement, open curly brace, close curly brace syntax, and also don't use the contains method since it's not thread safe. Instead, you want to be using put if absent inside the context of that filter expression. This call here does not belong in the map. It belongs up here in filter. And also, you need to make sure you check the return value of put if absent because that's the whole purpose of calling put if absent is to find out whether you've already seen this particular link before. And then you can turn this into a method reference within the map, and that will clean things up quite a bit. I also don't think you need to use the toString method here as well. Yet, some more problems with crawl page async. As you can see, it was a somewhat tricky method. Don't be calling the get page method in just. Move that to a later call using the .map operator after you've gone ahead and filtered out the page by checking to see if it exceeds the depth or if it's already been visited in an earlier pass. Yet some more problems with crawl page async. You can combine these 2 expressions into a single call to filter, which is cleaner. Please use a method reference here rather than a lambda expression. And there's no need to be calling take with the depth. That should be handled by the checks here in the filter expression. So that's the way you deal with that. Yet another issue with crawl page async. I think that's the last one. This should go into the filter operator below. And again, you need to chain these things together. They need to be chained together. You need to be checking the return values as part of the chain. Otherwise, no point in what you're doing here. And all this stuff needs to be refactored so you're chaining things together properly rather than creating local variables. Okay, at long last, we can move on to another method. This is images on page and page links async. You don't need to create a local variable here. Just return the results of this flux operator chain. Down here, the wrong values being passed as the second parameter to images on page links async. Please take a look at the depth parameter that's passed to the images on page and page links async method, and use that as kind of a hint as to what you should be doing here. You should be doing something important with depth because you're going down an extra depth here. And why I don't know why subscribe is being called here. You shouldn't be calling subscribe anywhere. There should be no references or comment specifications indicating the use of subscribe. So please don't call subscribe. Let's take a look now at a bunch of problems with images on page links async. This code is just way too complicated. You just need to start by calling the get page elements as strings method from within flux from iterable as you do here. And then you'll call .flatmap on the result of crawl page async. And please notice also here that you're passing the wrong value here as the second parameter to crawl page async. You need to be doing something with depth here. Let's come down here and take a careful look at the another problem with images on page links async. This is going to be extra work. There's no need to call just. There's no need to call flat map a second time. You can kind of collapse this code. It'll be cleaner and more concise. More problems, make sure that you update the depth parameter properly. And also please associate the subscribe on call here with the result of calling crawl page async rather than the result of calling flat map. So that's just a little syntactic thing to move it into the right nesting of the parens. In this particular case, the call to subscribe on has been omitted from crawl page async. It should be added here. Yet some more problems. This code is just way too complicated for, now we're into a new method, images on page async. And this method is also way too complicated. You don't need all these calls to flux.just, subscribe on, map, or filter. You just have to pass in a method reference that we'll be calling the download image async method. And same thing down here. This is all way too complicated. You just need to pass in a method reference to do transform image async. So way, way cleaner. Here's another problem with images on page async. Don't pass in the page parameter here. We just want to process image elements at this point, as per the name, images on page async. We've dealt with pages earlier. Please use a method reference, not a Lambda expression. And same thing here, please use a method reference, not a Lambda expression. Now, here's something I don't really even know what's going on. First of all, there's no need to call optional of nullable here. That's not necessary. This code is just way, way, way too complicated. Please take a look at the specification comment above at the top of the method. It explains kind of what needs to be done. There's just way too many checks. There's no need to check for null, for example. You should be using optional properly. And also, I guess I'll talk about this later. Please make sure, please use a method reference here. And also, please use a method reference here. And don't check for opt not equal null, because if we're using an optional, then of course it should not be null. Let's take a look at other problems with images on page async. Again, you don't need to use optional of nullable here. Instead, you want to use the download image async via a method reference. Same kind of problem here. There's no need to be doing all these checks with optionals. Just call transform image async and move the null checking and the optional stuff into those methods. Speaking of download image async, this particular method is not handling null values properly by using job optional methods as described in the comment specification above. So make sure you fix that. There's some more stuff you'll need to add here to do that. Here's another problem with download image async. Please use method references here for both filter and map. And that's just a quick cleanup. Your IDE, your IntelliJ IDE should prompt you for how to make those fixes automatically, which is pretty cool. Just a couple of methods left to go. Here's transform image async. Again, this code is too complicated. can be simplified quite a bit. There's no need to create a new array list here. Just pass m transforms to the from iterable factory method directly. Please use a method reference here, and you also need to do that down here for filter. And note that there's a need to swap these. You want to filter before you do the map. And also this is not the right way to check to see whether something is null. You need to be using optional, and you need to be using the optional is present method reference. And I'm not sure what this call is doing here, but it doesn't need to be here. And then finally, this method also needs to be updated to make sure it handles null values via the Java optional methods as per the comment specification above. So those were the problems I saw when I reviewed assignment number 3. Hopefully this will help give you some clues as to how to work properly with the assignment, how to get the unit test to work, make sure you run the unit tests. And again, if you run into problems, feel free to post your questions to the Piazza discussion forum.